Welcome to the September edition of the Meteor Club question and answer. This month, I have special guest Jeremy Shimko with me. Welcome, Jeremy.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, it's awesome. I'm excited. I've been picking your brain a lot about some stuff lately, and I thought it might be a timely topic. So you're kind of a freelancer, and you just do various Meteor work for clients. Is that right?
Yep. Yeah. It's almost everything is actually everything is Meteor, but almost everything is a combination of Meteor and DevOps kind of stuff. Not surprisingly, pretty heavy on the Docker side of things these days. Not too many strong arguments not to be anymore. So yeah, that's kind of been my focus. You know, I've been freelance for years, and I finding a super specific niche is usually a good angle to go with that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I mean, you had a bit of a DevOps background before you started doing Meteor, right?
Yeah, that's right. I had a little bit more of a DevOps background before web development in general, so that's kind of how that natural progression happened. I didn't really care for the operations world is a very different. It's a very different culture compared to the development world, and that alone was a big part of a lot of the work out there is kind of a corporate IT kind of thing. I mean, that's changing these days with the startup scene blowing up, but yeah, it was a drastically different culture moving to development. So there's a lot of space for developers that also have the operations background. So it turned out to be a nice fit. I mean, combining skill sets is always a good competitive edge for sure.
Yeah. Well, I guess the term DevOps is a combining of the skill sets in the first place, right?
Yeah. But interestingly, I find that a lot of what gets lumped into the category of DevOps tends to be a lot lighter on the development side of things.
Yeah.
I mean, maybe that's an unfair generalization, but that's been my exposure to it. Like, for example, if you listen to, DevOps podcasts and or read DevOps focused blogs, it definitely is a lot more geared toward the ops side of things. I mean, obviously that's what makes it unique from development, but yeah, there tends to be not as much of that kind of 50-50 divide. It's usually it's biased a lot more towards operations.
Yeah. For sure. I mean, I remember being back in Rails land and actually did some DevOps work for a Rails machine, and they had a big client that had a game, Scrabble-like game. I still don't think I'm allowed to mention it, but
top secret Scrabble.
Yeah, it's pretty popular. But I remember doing scaling there, and they were using Puppet, and I don't know, that was I was never a fan of Puppet. Honestly, I used Chef a little bit, but even that didn't feel like the right solution. So I don't know. Interesting stuff.
Yeah. I think that's a pretty common experience, especially for developers anyway. I mean, maybe a lot of ops people are more used to using tools like that because they're standard tools. But anybody who's ever tried to use Chef or Puppet generally come away with that same. Any developers, I should say, that have used things like Chef or Puppet, even if you're comfortable with well, in the case of Chef, Ruby, it's still a pretty. It's this whole separate world you need to learn, and it's not using Docker as a comparison. There's a separate world you need to learn there, but getting up and running is far less complicated.
With Docker, you mean it's far less complicated?
Yeah,
with Docker?
Yeah, exactly. I think probably maybe one of the only exceptions I came across that was a little more approachable without having to spend 6 months learning it was Ansible. I definitely felt that was a little more. It was a little bit more, a little easier to get up and running in a reasonable amount of time. I think they're YAML config files, and it's pretty straightforward. You could spend a weekend going through the documentation and getting up and running, and if you already know how some of the operation stuff works, using those tools are a lot more straightforward.
That's interesting. So then, why Docker versus Ansible? Is Docker more powerful in your opinion?
I mean, I feel like they're kind of solving two different problems. I mean, there is a lot of overlap there, but generally a lot of the repetitive stuff is taken care of for you in Docker, and I feel like I've always had to do a bit more to get up and running when using Chef, Puppet, Ansible, that kind of stuff. As far as configuration for a given project, I mean, I feel like that was just a huge generalization between the two tools. But I'm also hardly an Ansible wizard either, so I probably am also not giving it a fair chance there. I'm much stronger with Docker these days than I ever was with Ansible. But yeah, it's I feel like Docker takes care of a lot more of the tedious steps than any of those other tools have in the past. The biggest hurdle is getting used to the terminology, and for people who aren't comfortable with operation stuff, knowing what's actually happening inside of containers. A lot of the time, you don't necessarily need to know, and that's kind of the beauty of it is you can build on top of an existing container and just add the couple of things you need to it. You don't really need to know what happens in that downstream container.
So I was going to ask you about that actually. How do you what's the recommended best practice to modify a container that someone's already put out there? You need to add on to it. How do you do that?
There are a couple ways you could go at it. It depends on what your needs are. Probably the most common and simplest way would be what you see in most Docker files, if not all Docker files, is the from directive. It's usually the first line of any Docker file, and it's essentially the base image that whatever happens in this Docker file is going to be built on top of. So, for example, if you were building a Node app, you would probably use, unless you needed heavy customization, you would probably use the Node standard image from Docker, the official image. Pretty much any mainstream framework or anything like that has its own official image in Docker world. So you would do, from node and then, colon the version number you want. And now you have a server that's already running Node, and you can just dump your Node app into it and run it, and it should be reliably always the same. You don't ever have to worry about setting up Node, which is, it's things like that are kind of the pitch for developers that don't necessarily need a super complicated setup, but wonder is it even worth? We can see that's actually one of the more common, or one of the more popular questions there is why go through the trouble of learning this if I have a relatively simple use case? That's a perfect example. Is you have a node dependency. I mean, maybe that's.
Yeah. It put the question up there.
Yeah. So you have set dependencies, so you can start from a starting point where you're not reinventing the wheel. You're not firing up a server and shelling into it and installing your dependencies or even running the scripts that do it. Somebody else who is far more familiar with that upstream dependency is making that base container for you. So anything node related is being taken, in that example, is being taken care of by node wizards somewhere. So that's kind of an example there. And Mongo might be another one. You use the official Mongo container, and it's installed right. It isn't you figuring out how to set up Mongo over the weekend and installing it on your own server, all shelling in there and doing it yourself manually. You just put from Mongo and the version you want, and you're running on the officially right way to install Mongo. And it's as simple as that. And in that case, you probably don't even need a Docker file at that point. You just use that container. So the other, to get back to your original question of how you would customize, the other angle there would be to overwrite what the default command is. And, the default thing that runs, the process that is set to run on a given container when it fires up. You might overwrite that, write your own script to, before that Mongo process starts. And this is actually a perfect example of something, a container I have. I have a customized Mongo image that I use to create a Dockerized Mongo replica set. And one of the things, a couple of the things I override, instead of the default, just have the container come up and Mongo starts and it's ready to accept connections, I interrupt that, set up a couple of default users that I pass in as environment variables, set up the replica set configuration, and all of that, and then it starts the Mongo process. So it's still the same base image of Mongo, but I did a couple of other things in the default, in the command, in the setup of the process before it officially starts its long running state. So those are probably the two. I mean, there's a million different ways you can customize from there, but those would be the two most common approaches to answer the question.
Yeah, that's a good answer. So back maybe to Ben's question, since we started to dive into it, what do you think are? Huh?
I think you should have a beard.
No.
Yeah, a different Ben's question.
Yeah. Same Ben.
Just shave his head.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah. So, what are some signs that you think would lead you to tell the owner of a project, right? So Ben comes from OKGrow, and they have clients, and so what would lead you to tell the client that, hey, I think it's time that we move this to Docker, Or, I mean, do you just start off right there, since your clients, you have that knowledge level and comfortability, and is that a word?
Yeah. Yeah. So, I mean, obviously, it kind of goes without saying that there's some technical overhead there. If you don't currently know how to do it, you have to make sure that you do before it becomes your standard practice. But I'd argue that that's also no more difficult than learning Meteor. If you can take the time to learn something like that from scratch, Docker is really not an exception there. That would be that'd be the same thing. There's I think it's dockerbook.com. It's, like every technology out there, somebody wrote, what is kind of more or less one of the more official books on it. And that, I mentioned that one specifically because it's a lot like Discover Meteor, in that it's constant updates over time. It's hard to consider buying a technology book that it won't have future updates these days. So that's if you're wanting to get started with Docker, I recommend that one. I picked that one up, and it was very thorough, and they keep it up to date. So that's a good place to get started, and it explains things in a way that if you are a developer, it should be pretty digestible. But to answer the question, I think in the case of Meteor apps, when you're running locally, you're obviously doing it the way we all normally do it in Meteor's development mode. But I still think there's also some value in using Docker even at small scale. One of the main pitches for Docker is you're putting it inside of this container that can it's a building block that can fit anywhere. It's the whole origination of the idea of the name is around shipping containers, as in the physical steel containers that go on a boat. They're standardized. They're all the same size. It doesn't matter what's inside of them. It will always fit on a ship, on a cargo boat, no matter what. Doesn't matter if it's refrigerated goods. It doesn't matter if it's clothing. What's inside does not matter to the outside infrastructure. So that could be running on a local VM that you're running on your development machine, which a perfect example of why you might do that locally in the context of Meteor is testing production deployments, because the container, as I said, it doesn't matter if it's on a cluster of 20 servers, or if it's on a VM on your local machine. It has no idea where it is. It runs the same way no matter what. So you can test it all out there. You can fire up multiple VMs locally and test cluster setup if you wanted to do that. They essentially, so it's VirtualBox. They all get assigned a local IP. And you set it up just like you would on the public internet, except without having to spin up spin up servers on a public cloud and get Docker installed and all that. You can do it locally. And side note on that, Docker makes kind of all the tools to do all of this stuff without having to reinvent the wheel, like provisioning servers. Docker machine is specifically used for that. For example, you can set up fully configured VMs, or you can set up AWS instances, or DigitalOcean, or Microsoft Azure if that's your thing. Which of course is the most complicated one there is to set up. No surprise there, but. So it's just a single command. It boots up and configures a server, gets Docker all installed, and you can run your container there right from the same command you did locally. And there's no you're not setting up Nginx. You're not opening ports and say it's all in Docker files, and it's in version control. It's a great way to go versus manually setting that stuff up, regardless of what size you're using it at.
Yeah. I feel like for me, like having Crater on MUP isn't bad, but like there's a lot of hand configuration that I've done at this point to Nginx, which isn't very portable for me. Like I would have to go copy that file and put it somewhere, and then remember where I put it later, and like that's probably a pretty terrible process. For having a production deploy.
The other kind of aside from not caring where that container lives, they're probably the second most important feature there is process isolation. So assuming your server has the resources to do it, you can have any amount of containers running on that server that it can handle. So you can only expose the same public port on no different than a typical server setup. You can only have one thing on port 80, so you'd have to load balance any web traffic that way. But a common setup for me is to run multiple Meteor apps, multiple instances of the same Meteor app on a given server, and I just have an Nginx container that just proxies between them, and then if I need to do rolling updates, I can update one container at a time and not have any downtime. And I could have, assuming the server was powerful enough, I could have 20 Meteor apps running on that same server. And they're entirely portable. If I need to spread that out and move it to more servers, the containers are just snapshots of the app and are completely portable. There's no in the case of Meteor, there's no state in them. It doesn't. I can move to a bigger server in a matter of minutes. The longest part of that is actually waiting for the server to boot up. So yeah, it's super portable. It using MUP as a comparison, handling multiple apps on the same multiple Meteor apps on the same server using MUP is perfectly possible, and it's what I did up until I started doing it with Docker. But like you said, you're manually going in and editing Nginx config files to add new to add new upstream virtual hosts and things flying in my face and distracting me here. Sorry.
That's all right.
It's a lot more of a manual process. So,
Yeah.
we talked about this the other day. Way I get around that in the Docker way is using, it is the second most popular Nginx container on Docker Hub. It's called Nginx Proxy, and you fire that up on the server, and that listens on 80 and 443, and then anything else you fire up on that server, you just give it a virtual host environment variable, and Nginx sees that, updates it, sets up its configuration, and starts forwarding traffic there when that domain name hits Nginx. So it works in the same way that reverse proxying normally works, except it's
automatic.
All you have to do is just start a Docker container with a virtual host environment variable set, and Nginx does it on the fly with no downtime and without writing any code or writing any config files. And obviously it does the same thing in reverse. You kill the containers, Nginx updates its config so it doesn't continue to forward traffic there. And there's a lot of little things like that they're repeatable, they're reliable, and they're less steps than how it was traditionally done. So even if you're running small single container Meteor apps and you're getting 2 visitors a day, I still see no reason not to go that route. It's just easier to manage. Doing an update is as simple as rebuilding a new container, tagging it with a new version number, and then deploying that new version number, and doing kind of a rolling update. And the old ones are shut down, and the new ones are replace it, and Nginx updates its config, and it all just kind of magically happens for you.
Yeah, which generally shouldn't be a problem unless you're changing your data, right? Like migration or something.
Yeah. So in the case of Meteor, it's almost your data should never be in the same container with the app. It actually, in pretty much almost any case,
but if you make some kind of breaking change in the code and you spin up a new version of the app, it will change the database, and then the old versions would need to be updated right away.
Yeah. So another thing that enables is easy rollback. So if you're versioning every one of your Docker images. If you fire up a new one and you start hitting it and realize it's borked, you can just stop that one and restart the one with the old version number. That container will still be existing on the server, and within 2 seconds, the app will be up and running.
Nice.
The node process getting started takes longer than the container does to start. So it's super flexible.
All right. So I'm going to skip over GUI's question for now. That's how you say it. And we'll answer Ben's next one. What do you think of Meteor Hack's cluster?
I really, to be fair, only used it to test out when it first came out, and at the time I didn't have a specific use case to start using it in production for. And then kind of Docker became my standard workflow, and I accomplished the same thing in other ways now. I just I use HA Proxy or Nginx for load balancing, and
yeah, I would tend to agree with your take on it. To me, I feel like you lose some ability. Like if you're going to use Meteor Hack's cluster, I mean, in reality, you should have SSL sitting in front of your site. There's no reason in this day and age. I mean, it's like $15 and like maybe an hour of your time to get it configured properly. Like, and Meteor Hack's cluster doesn't really offer you a way to terminate that SSL in front. So you'd still have to put Nginx or HA Proxy in front of it, and then at that point, I question the benefits of Meteor Hack's cluster. I mean, it's nice, I guess it self-configs itself, but I mean.
Yeah, no, I'm sure there are certainly plenty of use cases for it, and from everything I've ever read, I have no reason to believe it isn't a great tool. But yeah, SSL termination is a great example of something it doesn't solve, and the things that do solve it also solve what cluster solves to some extent, pretty much the same ways. Or I'm sorry, not the same ways, but Another thing is that's obviously Meteor specific. And a load balancer, HA proxy or Nginx, or just a reverse proxy, whatever, is not Meteor specific. So, a lot of us probably don't have a lot of non-Meteor apps going, but surely plenty of people do, and just using a standard reverse proxy setup, you could use anything. It's all standardized protocols at that point, so it doesn't care what's upstream of it. But yeah, SSL termination is a big one. I mean, arguably anybody who's doing anything in production at this point that has a login, without question, should be using SSL. So at that point, you need a solution for that anyway. Even if you're not load balancing, you need the termination solution anyway. So, well, you don't need it, but not a great idea.
All right. So we got some more questions in here. So this one's maybe gonna take us off the DevOps topic, but I'm curious. Do you recommend switching to Flow Router, React, Blaze Plus? Like, have you touched any of that stuff, or?
So I'm all Flow Router these days. I'm not super passionate about it, but I for most of the same reasons everybody else has already heard 1,000 times. Unpredictable reactivity stuff with Iron Router was a little rough. Some of the hooks did not always happen when you expect them to, and there were a lot of workarounds that had to be employed to make things work that just felt like they shouldn't be as complicated as they were. And like everybody should be saying, Iron Router is obviously a fantastic piece of software. Also, it's not a terrible thing, but it's there are a handful of things that need attention, and it seems like development slowed down, and Flow Router is quite the opposite on both of those things, and it just seemed to make more sense, and it's straightforward to use. So on the Flow Router point, yes, I don't see any reason not to use that at this point. But as far as React, I kind of just don't care, to be honest. I'm sure it's fantastic, but there's only so many hours in the day, and until I'm convinced that it is worth the cognitive overhead of spending the time to learn it, which I am not convinced that it is so much better than Blaze, that I have to use it. I happen to like Blaze. I find it more approachable. I think the way that there's HTML in JavaScript is ugly as hell, and it's just. I think the whole thing is it's developer preference. It's not. There are obviously some features that React has that Blaze doesn't, but for the most part, it's a matter of time.
Yeah, I think in order for me, I still plan to do a little test React project, but in order for me to feel like I have to switch or it's imperative, I would have to feel like Meteor is going to come out and say oh, we're deprecating Blaze, and that's not going to happen. No. There's far too many people that use Blaze and like Blaze that.
Yeah, and it's beginner friendly for sure. If you're working in open source, it is a lot more approachable to a lot more people. It's just straight HTML, and the handlebar stuff that's in it is, in most cases, so obvious what it's doing. It's not hard to figure out for most people, and that's a huge time save. That's an advantage to me. Is that there's just not the cognitive overhead that like I said, there's only so many hours in the day, and things that just add more time and don't have massive payoffs are hard for me to justify. But I'm sure it's fantastic software and does amazing things that I currently can't do with Blaze. But I'm not losing sleep over it. I think we all have a tendency to chase shiny objects, but React is not shiny enough for me. So at least not right now. I haven't had the need, you know. And I think server-side rendering is one of the real common arguments there, and I do wish that was a more out-of-the-box solution for Blaze. But there are options, and they are faster than me learning React. So
yeah, definitely.
Until that changes, you know, I try to revisit this stuff as often as possible because stuff changes so fast, and you know, whatever. So yeah, I'm pretty neutral on. Well, I guess you call that neutral.
I forgot to hit start on that question. Whoops. All right.
And Blaze Plus, I've only read the initial post that Aeronoda pushed out when it came out. It sounds cool, and that's as far as I've gotten on that.
Yeah. So the next question's from Augustin. I hope I said that right. What is the actual progress of the Galaxy project? So neither of us work for MDG. I don't know that we can reliably answer this. Have you signed an NDA with Meteor?
No. Short answer is I know nothing about Galaxy progress. Like 99.9% of the rest of the world.
You maybe know more than 99% of the world, just because in the Meteor Club Slack chat, Pete Corey posted a little. He was able to sniff out a little hack that showed some of the domains that were allowed to create accounts and log in.
Yeah,
which was interesting.
Users. That was a pretty hilarious find.
Yeah, I emailed Matt after Pete found it, and I said, "Hey, you're leaking out your customer list," and I checked the other day, and it's gone now.
It's gone now. Yeah.
Pretty funny. So I mean, like, we maybe learned a little bit there. I would say there's a few startups that are on there. I don't even remember the list now, so it's kind of hard for me to even say who was on there. I just remember specifically seeing Crossroads on there because that's where I go to church, and they had that big Cordova app that Differential built for them, and it looks like they're getting ready to launch another app that Differential is building for them, and I think they're hosting everything on Galaxy. So maybe when they come out of NDA, I'd be really interested to see a blog post on that. But
I think, I mean, purely speaking from personal opinion at this point, I think it'll probably be a great product for what it's supposed to be. I'm sure it'll be a robust production environment for Meteor apps, and there's certainly nobody better to build something like that for Meteor. But at the same time, I also think that someone like me isn't their target audience either.
Yeah. Actually,
I can build it without that, and there is just absolutely no way that from a pricing perspective alone, there's no way that it could be a good enough pricing scheme for me to not do it myself. There's always an advantage, even if you know what for example, you know how to set up MongoDB. That doesn't necessarily mean Compose is a waste of your money. It's not trivial to have that all set up and have a easy dashboard and backups and restores and all of that automated stuff. There is still value in paying for something you already know how to do and have somebody else take care of it. But I don't know that Galaxy will be it for me. And I also think a lot of people are going to be surprised at what it costs.
Yeah.
Maybe I'll be wrong on that, and they'll be able to afford to be competitive because of scale. But it's running on AWS, which we all know is the most expensive cloud provider in most cases.
Well, even AWS aside, like the largest cost center in a hosting service is usually your support, and they're not going to get around that. Like people costs are people costs, and you can't really like tamp that down too far because I mean, if you hire good support people that speak English and have some technical knowledge, it's gonna there's a minimum that you're gonna pay for that, in my opinion. So
yeah, no, absolutely. It's cutting edge technologies that a really relatively small percentage of the population are actually talented at this point, because the stuff just hasn't existed that long. They're just, you had to have been an early adopter. Meteor is another perfect example of that. You had to have been using it from pretty early on when stuff was still broken to be really good at Meteor right now. And that's the case for a lot of people in the Meteor community right now. And it's kind of the same for Docker and Kubernetes and all of the technologies that are behind things like Galaxy. There's such a small pool, relatively speaking, of people that are actually highly skilled in that, and anybody that is can kind of demand whatever they want for money right now. And so that's going to be a big cost for them for sure. And it's not something you can skip out on. There's not really anything more important than stuff working. So
yeah, I also think that's going to be the single source of slowing down the release of Galaxy, is the fact that they're going to have to hire a lot of people, right? Like, they can't make this available to people for production without likely supplying an SLA. And so even though, like, we know they probably have somewhere around 5 to 10 customers on it right now, and I know for sure, like, Classcraft has tweeted that they have 400,000 users and they have 5,000 active peak connections every day. And they've moved to Galaxy, and we know they're on production hosting. Like, these were public tweets yesterday. I mean, until they have a good support system in place, they don't really want to open it up to a lot of people. And hiring people for this job and training them and getting them ready, like that's also going to take time. So
yeah,
I think we'll be lucky to see this thing in public availability before December 31st. I would be a little shocked.
Yeah, because it's not just operations people. It's operations people that understand Meteor and Mongo and super specific technologies, which is obviously the big argument for focusing specifically only on that, which is also actually part of my answer of why I feel like Galaxy probably, I'm not their target audience, is I also need solutions for things that are not Meteor, and I think a lot of production apps probably fall into that category as well. And it'll be interesting to see how they handle that. Kind of, as I mentioned, the beauty of Docker is that it doesn't really care what's in the containers. So I imagine at some point they will, and I believe Matt kind of alluded to this in an interview with you, that it's not out of the question that they will, allow, these are my words, not his, that they will allow people to use their own containers, and from their infrastructure point of view, it's not necessarily that much more complicated than what they're already doing because of things like Docker. So who knows? I mean, I think they're a long way away from that at this point, but I think there will be some pressure to do that because, as I'm sure most people notice, the whole infrastructure as a service or Docker infrastructure as a service business plan is blowing up right now. There are a million companies that are doing some variation of essentially what Galaxy's doing, but for any kind of app. And some of them are doing a really interesting job, and some of them are kind of amusing and not so much. But
maybe that's a good segue here. Max7 asked, "What is your favorite container orchestration tool?" And I think maybe you're alluding to places like Tudum and stuff like that. Is that what you're talking about?
Yeah, I think for me personally, the jury's still out on that. I've used Tudum a lot at this point. I've used Rancher a little, and before Kubernetes actually released their much better documentation, I had started investigating there, but at the time it was you needed a PhD to get going, and I kind of walked away because I didn't want to build rockets for a living. So right now I'm using Tudum a lot for orchestration stuff, but I actually, maybe this is a perfect opportunity to plug a project I'm working on, which, despite the look on your face, I have been given direct permission to do so.
Yes. Awesome.
So I'm working with Reaction Commerce, which most of you probably know is a Meteor e-commerce app that is in beta right now. Big release coming up, and one of the main cores of how that all works is that a user will sign up for an account, and they launch a shop, and what that does is launch a Dockerized instance of the Reaction Commerce Meteor app, and all of the Mongo stuff. So that Dockerized Mongo replica set stuff I mentioned earlier is actually what's in use there. So when somebody signs up, the project I'm working on is called LaunchDoc, which there is
this is version 2 of it.
Yes, this is version 2. It is currently not open source, but it is going to be. And version 1, you can check that out on OngoWorks GitHub to see kind of the rough idea of what it does. But how it's being implemented now it's
completely
it's
different.
literally a rewrite from scratch. I started from an empty folder on LaunchDoc2, but essentially what it accomplishes is the same thing. It's just the Docker ecosystem has changed so much in the last year that we had a lot of new tools available. So a rewrite was in line. So essentially what that does is kind of the orchestration side of things. It picks what servers things go on, and sets them all up, sets up the databases and sets up the apps, and sets up the domain names for it, and the load balancer and all of that, and spits back to the user a domain name, and they can hit the wrap. So the whole process happens in about 20 seconds, and you have a 3-host Mongo replica set across 3 servers, and an app container on a 4th server, and then a load balancer on a 5th server, and that whole kind of orchestration
and so Tudum uses like a network overlay, right? You told me the name of it. It was like
it's Weave.
Weave, yeah. And so like it creates private network connections between all the boxes that you spin up, and allows them to talk together, which is pretty awesome. And then with Tudum itself, you go in and like put in your DigitalOcean keys, right, or like your AWS keys, and then it knows where you want to put the servers, and it'll spin those up for you automatically.
Yep, and so kind of the beauty of that is from the LaunchDoc side of things, and from the containerized app side of things, it doesn't really care where those hosts are. So Tudum kind of actually puts a single unified API around having any cloud provider. So you can set up any major cloud provider, or a bring your own node setup. So you could have your own bare metal running in your own data center, or any combination of all of them. So you could split them up all over the place. And then there are tons of ways to implement overlay networking right now, and that is far from being a done deal solved problem. There's a ton going on right now, and it's not quite there yet. Weave works and does what it's supposed to do, but it's an early Docker networking, overlay networking is an early thing right now.
Yeah. You were saying you were having a bug with HA proxy.
What's that? You
were having a bug with HA proxy, you said?
Yeah. We had an issue where it wasn't resolving. So basically the way an overlay network works is it's just connecting. Weave has an agent running on every one of the servers, any amount of servers, and they all communicate. And the servers from that particular network interface it creates the servers appear to be on the same local network and function as if they were on the same local network, and they could be anywhere across the world with any combination of cloud providers. So as you can imagine, it's a complicated problem to solve and have it work reliably. But it is one that right now, Tutum is one of the better ones solving it. It is not perfection at this point, but nobody is in their defense. So, but Docker is also working on official Docker overlay network stuff. Yeah, there are going to be free open source Docker solutions to doing this same kind of thing. Now, you're not that doesn't replace Tutum's dashboard and their HTTP API and their WebSockets API and all of that. I can monitor my entire cluster and all of the containers all over WebSockets from LaunchDoc, which is obviously also a Meteor app. So it's that doesn't come out of the box with Docker, that whole infrastructure. So it's certainly great right now. But I think to get back to the question, I think what my favorite orchestration tool is right now is to be determined. And I think over the next 6 months, a lot of stuff's going to be popping up. One that's really big right now and is serious scale and well proven is Apache Mesos and specifically Mesosphere, which is built on top of that. Apache Mesos is open source, and there's a whole ecosystem of stuff around that. But the big name drop there is Twitter. That's what Twitter's running on with thousands and thousands of servers, and it's essentially so all that overlay networking, clustering, and resource management, all of that stuff is taken care of by tools like that. So as servers start to run out of resources, automatically new servers start coming up and containers start getting spread out across all those servers. And as resources start to go away, containers get packed as efficiently as possible into the existing servers, and those servers get killed. So there's just dynamic scaling of all these servers, and yeah, you can do stuff like that, elastic junk with AWS or whatever, but that's just AWS. Whereas this is anything. This is any server, whether it's your own or a cloud provider. So my ideal is probably something more along those lines. It's scalable to just about any size you could ever imagine, and also perfectly functional for just a couple of servers. So it's a complicated thing to get into. There's a lot of moving parts. You're essentially building what Tutum is yourself with open source tools. It's great that those options are available, and while we are working on an open source project and trying to solve all those same problems, our preference is most definitely to be as open source as possible and have everything built on top of open source technologies and be interchangeable and be cloud provider agnostic and all of that stuff, because that's one of the big things that isn't being solved for really well right now. A lot of them are you're tied in some way to some specific technology or the expensive side of things, the hosting, the servers. You're usually in some way tied to some kind of provider, and nobody wants that. So the goal is to get to something as robust as that, and try and use, if not all, mostly open source solutions. But for right now, Tutum is solving basically everything that Mesos would theoretically solve, and they're doing it with a nice API wrapper that takes seconds to write. All I got to do is build this JSON object for a configuration of what I want to launch and send a single call, and boom, this cluster of stuff gets set up. And I didn't need to think about how that works. I didn't need to support it, and so there are some advantages to that. But yeah, moving forward, I think orchestration stuff is a moving target still, and a little too new.
So I don't think you'll like this next one.
I haven't seen it yet.
The Docker setup sounds awesome. Do you know of any good blog posts or step-by-step guides for getting a deployment like the one you describe up and running?
I know
Basically, have you written a blog post, Jeremy?
There's a blog post somewhere right up here that is long overdue for sure. No, I don't have. I was saying this to you, Josh, not too long ago, that a lot of what's out there, is geared toward the ops audience. I find that a lot more of the people using Docker and tools like that. There's certainly plenty of crossover, but there's a lot of assumption that you understand a lot more of the server junk and just managing Linux servers and all of that. It kind of glosses over a lot of that stuff. And in a lot of cases, to be fair, you don't necessarily always need to know how it works if it automatically gets configured for you. But yes, there aren't a lot of blog posts or videos or whatever resources in general toward the typical like Meteor developer that just needs the setup like I described for the basic getting started setup. A reverse proxy that terminates SSL and 2 containers behind it, so you have a little fault tolerance and you can do rolling upgrades. It's actually not all that complicated, but the process of finding a step-by-step explanation of that is you end up having to piece together from 20 blog posts that you may or may not find on your own. So yes, I'll get on that.
Nice. That would be awesome. All right. So maybe this isn't the last one. We'll see. Ben Strahan asked, should I shave my head? I'm worried I will be too cold during the winter. I would say don't. Well, there's a couple considerations here, like how ugly is your head when it's shaved? I'm guessing with Ben, it's probably pretty ugly.
Yeah.
And then the other consideration is, what the hell, dude? You live in Chicago. No way. I would only shave it if I had to.
Yeah. That comes down to me, like, are you going bald right up here? Because if you're not, why don't you embrace how lucky you are with your genes?
Exactly. Like, I got no hair right here.
Yeah.
I don't even have to shave that part.
Yeah. So we're solid on that one. If you don't have to shave your head because you have some terrible old guy bald spot that makes you look like you're 45 when you're 35, or in my case, 40 when I was 22, then don't do it.
Yeah, totally. Don't do it. Well, and again, my guess is Ben's got a pretty ugly head. I think his mama dropped him on his head when he was young. All right, so this is maybe related. I had a question on here as well. Like, so my question was like, why Docker instead of something like platform as a service like Modulus or Heroku? And then David Sakura, I think I said that right, also asked, like, what is your favorite place to deploy Meteor apps and how do you coordinate that deployment?
So I'll take that one first. I guess the answer to that, probably not surprisingly, is it depends. It usually depends. Probably starts out with what is the budget, who's it for, and what is the budget, and what does it need for scale, and what other resources is it using. But I'm pretty much equal opportunity between AWS and DigitalOcean. For anything that's bigger and production-ish, I tend to lean toward AWS, like most people. But for just about everything else, DigitalOcean is super easy to use. And when I say easy to use, what I mean specifically in this case is using Docker's tools. Using Docker Machine as one of the things in the Docker toolbox, which is literally the name of it, which by the way, if you go to Docker and follow the getting started links, there's the Docker toolbox, which installs the whole suite of everything they make, which is Docker itself, Docker Compose, Docker Machine, and Docker Swarm. Swarm is kind of the multi-host thing. It's pre-production at this.
Yeah, it's pretty new still, right?
What's that? It's
pretty new still.
Yeah, it's fairly new. I think it was the tail end of last year was when it first got announced, and it's it's still, they still say don't use it in production, but it's moving quick.
I think they still say don't use Docker Machine in production too.
They might. I'm not
pretty sure when I was reading docs, they're like, yeah, this is not considered production ready, but it works.
Yeah, whatever. But tons of people do. So including me. So anyway, out of the suite of tools there, Docker Machine, is just a command line tool that you can use to fire up Docker servers with Docker pre-configured and installed, not pre-configured. It will boot them up and install Docker and configure it, and we'll set up the the encrypted tunnel between them so that you can send commands back and forth. And essentially all that does is other than set up the server itself, it allows you to run Docker commands and run start up containers, start and stop containers, and do whatever that you normally would do locally on that machine in the same way. So, so same commands. So you use Docker Machine to choose which machine you're controlling at any moment, and then you can start running normal Docker commands and do them just as if you were doing it locally. So kind of circling back to the why would I do it for a small app that may not need huge scale. An example there would be I would use Docker Machine to create a local VM and test all my containers on there and make sure they work. And then I would use Docker Machine to create the production or staging servers on, say, AWS, and then I would run the same containers there, and I can jump back and forth, and the whole workflow is identical in both cases. And I'm not doing a single thing to set up that server. There are drivers for any major cloud platform, Azure, Google stuff, DigitalOcean, or just a generic on your own box if you wanted to. So it's the same workflow whether you're deploying it to a local VM or it's probably for people who are familiar with Vagrant, it's kind of a similar idea as that, where you can it's making a repeatable config file for a deployment. It's putting the definition of infrastructure in text form that you can commit to your repo, and it can be deployed locally for development or remotely and on a full production cluster, and the process is exactly the same. So I tend to use Docker Machine for just about everything I do these days. So I'll work locally most of the time, and then when I'm ready to deploy something, I'll just Docker Machine create -d DigitalOcean and name the box and put in my API key and hit enter, and a minute later I have a server fully configured there, and I can launch Docker containers on it with Docker run my container.
Yeah, that was pretty sweet. You showed me that, I think it was like last Friday or something. And I was able to, over the weekend on Saturday, I just played around for 4 hours, mostly just learning all the commands, even though you showed them to me already.
Yeah.
And I was able to get a pre-render server up and running. And I think all told, I probably only spent about an hour and a half actually getting everything running. And, a lot of that was just getting the keys into my environment so I could spin that up, and then figuring out how to get the container started and how to map ports. And, I all told now, I feel like I could probably get it up in less than 5 minutes if I need to.
Yeah, it's super quick once you're familiar with a couple of commands, and you can also make little handy aliases for them if it's something you're doing often. That's something I like to do a lot. Little bash aliases. I can type 1 or 2 letters and 1 argument and fire up a server. little things like that make a huge difference in the workflow, and it's repeatable. And if you need to move to a different server, Docker machine create a new server, and you can move the containers over there. It's really it just makes the whole dealing with infrastructure so much simpler and quicker and repeatable and universal. It doesn't like I said, it doesn't matter where you're actually deploying these servers. Wasn't there? I feel like there was another question in there that I didn't answer.
Yeah, I think we kind of covered them both a little bit. I think my question was just like, why not just use something like Heroku or Modulus or something like that?
It's not all that different than what I mentioned, about my opinion of using Tudum is if it solves a problem for you that, yes, of course you could go learn how to solve the problem. But if it solves a problem for you that saves you time and comes with support, time is money, So if it's something that takes you days or weeks to learn, those are days or weeks that you're not getting paid. Now, you can also argue that having those skills make you worth more money, which is usually my standard argument in my head when I'm doing stuff like this and not getting paid for it right away. It is a valuable skill set, especially right now, especially while a lot of everyone wants to use it, and not everyone knows how to yet. So it is generally, I think, worth the time investment. But that's opinion, not fact. But if that's not your workflow and that's not something that you want to focus on, if you don't feel like the returns are there for going through the trouble, then I think those other things are perfectly fine. But they're essentially just taking care of that for you. But it comes at a cost. So it depends on the situation. I don't think there's anything wrong with them, but like a lot of people in this industry, I like doing stuff myself whenever I can, whenever it's reasonable.
Yeah.
That quickly gets out of hand, of course, but it's
all right. Let's take this last question here. Actually, there's two, but we'll take the one. One word answer to this. This question is from Ben Costanza. Have you ever heard of Docker?
Nope.
We've never heard of it. What is this show? I don't know. Where are we? No clue. Thanks, Ben. All right. Well, I want to say, number one, thank you to Jeremy for coming on the show and talking to us and talking about LaunchDoc. That was exciting. I'm super stoked.
Yes, everyone look out for that in the semi-near future. We're a little hazy on timeline here, but it's getting a lot of attention these days, and there's an open source Galaxy alternative on the way, folks.
Yes, I love it.
Excited. Keep an eye out for it.
Yeah. All right. And then where can people find you if they want to ask you more questions and take up all your time? Where can they find you?
You can, if you're not in the Meteor Club Slack chat, well, I am there. My name is just Jeremy, and I'm at Jeremy Shimko on Twitter, and
nice.
J Shimko on GitHub.
Awesome. All right. And if you are interested in supporting Meteor Club, which helps me pay the bills while I do things like this, you can go to Patreon, patreon.com/Meteor Club. And you can there's a $10 a month option there, and that will get you into the Slack chat, which is pretty awesome and full of all the best people in Meteor. And a ton of people that are learning too. So don't feel like it will be intimidating. But yeah, so thanks again, Jeremy. Appreciate it.
My pleasure. Thanks for everyone showing up. So it was great to nerd out on the stuff I'm working on.
Awesome. All right. Later, guys.
Bye, everybody.